5th day, middle wind month, 1 CE, hold it right there. Elishnish froze just as she was about to leap from one cliffside outcropping to the next. Below them, on a narrow ledge, a set of eyes reflected the faint moonlight leaking through the clouds. "I've not seen your kind before." The voice echoed off of the cliff face. "Who are you?" "My name is Pebble." "Pebble?" Another voice snickered. "What kind of name is that?" It was a low voice, but it was crystal clear to Elishnish and her companions. Pebble dropped 30 meters to the ledge below, landing in front of the con patrol. She rose to her full, 4-meter height, staring down at the one who had made the comment. "Do you have a problem with that?" Pebble asked. Across the patrol, ears went flat and whiskers drooped. "No," the con replied in a very small voice. "Pebble is fine. Your mother must have loved you very much." The Kronos didn't name their offspring, so that probably didn't make much sense to them. Elishnish dropped down and landed behind the con patrol. Pinecone hopped down from his crag as well, landing beside Pebble. The con cautiously backed away from the two towering Felid beastmen before them. One of them bumped into Elishnish, and he leapt up with a frightened shout. "Is fearful panic the natural state of your species?" Elishnish asked. It took several seconds for one of them to collect themselves enough to reply. Not at all." "I see. Then why have you interrupted our journey?" You've crossed into the Confederation of Rolengork. Not that you're unwelcome, mind you, we're just doing our job. As a patrol." In that case, Elishnish gestured to the two Kronos rangers standing across from her. The gentleman standing beside Pebble is Pinecone. "My name is Wintermoon. We're travelers from a people that hail from the northwest. But the Wyvern Riders are in the northwest. Far to the northwest. May we go now? If you plan on entering, you should at least learn the rules." "Why do you keep speaking like that? It's not as if I'm going to eat you." Even Quagua were less timid. Just how had these beastmen managed to invade a country that lit people on fire? "Very well," Elishnish said. "Lead the way. The village isn't far." "Wait, what's that thing? Is it your food?" The con pointed a claw at Viltava, who had fallen in line with Pebble and Pinecone. Since the Kronos druid had shed his antlers over the winter, he currently resembled an odd-looking sheep. Eventually, Pebble said. "I see. Well, this way, please." They followed the ledge down into one of the many highland valleys carved into the plateau. Lady Zaradnik had identified the area as an ideal entry point for Elishnish and her companions for several reasons that Elishnish could discern. The main reason was that it was in a position where conflict was minimized. In political terms, the borders in the area were strong and stable. In the northwest, the Wyvern Rider tribes were well entrenched and decisively answered any challenge. The north was the domain of a black dragon and most species were understandably averse to them. As a result, the people who lived on the plateau did not assume any stranger was inherently antagonistic and were more likely to talk than to attack. "So how large is this confederation of yours?" Elishnish asked. "It is vast beyond imagining," the con leading the patrol answered. "My tribe's territory is but a speck among the tens of thousands of tribes that dwell in Rolengork." "Is there any meaning to Rolengork?" "The Orakelon is the great river that flows through the length of the Confederation." "Ah, I see." Since she knew the river as the Orakelon, Rolengork was only translated when used to refer directly to the river. The other uses referred to other things associated with the river, but were not the river itself. "Are there any places you'd recommend for us to go?" Elishnish asked. "Anywhere special or some locations that your people are particularly proud of?" To be honest, none of us have ever gone beyond our tribe's territories. We only hear of the world beyond when the village merchant returns from his journeys." "They could go to Kau," one of the other cons suggested. "It is the biggest place that our merchant goes to. The jewel deer clip that the chief gave his daughter is from there." "Jewels?" She liked the sound of that. "Would it be possible to travel with this village merchant?" Elishnish asked. "His circuit takes a month and he was last at the village 3 weeks ago," the patrol leader replied. "He doesn't go back and forth directly. If you want to go straight to Kau, all you have to do is follow the river that goes by our village. That river will eventually join with another river called the Kora, and that's where you'll find Kau." A small crowd was stalking after them by the time they entered the village. The village itself was a collection of stone dens that used a stand of scraggly pines as a windbreak. She didn't see any signs or even the slightest evidence of writing to identify what each structure in the village was, though if the people here never left their territories, it wasn't exactly necessary. The patrol led them to a flat slab of rock in the center of the village, which Elishnish decided to dub the hall. Dozens of Con watched them curiously from their dens in the nearby trees, creating a field of eyes that reflected the scant moonlight. "Now," the patrol leader said, "the chief's out hunting, so you'll have to make do with me. Most of the rules are pretty common sense. First off, no poaching. If you do end up hunting something down, make sure you compensate the local tribe." "Is there some common measure of value here?" Elishnish asked. "Trade coins, perhaps?" "Usually, only the merchants and chiefs have coins, but, yeah, that'll work. Every tribe has some supplies to trade if you need them. You can pay the mystics for any magical treatment you might need, as well." Elishnish's long, fluffy tail curled and uncurled as the Con spoke. So far, it wasn't very different from how humans did things. Except for the poaching part. The beastmen were much more reasonable when it came to that. Poaching carried the death penalty in human lands. "Is every part of Rolengork the territory of one tribe or another?" "Yes. We have a race for every space. We Con, for instance, prefer mountains like these. They're the Lionfolk, prefer more arid and grassy places. Osalo are Jaguar folk who can live anywhere with decent rainforest. The Nar are the tiger folk that prowl the jungle floors. Gao and Lup, the dog and wolf beastmen, can scratch up a living just about anywhere that isn't flooded or sheer." "Is it only beastmen who dwell here?" "Yep," the patrol leader nodded. "There aren't any of your race, but no one should bother you about it. That weird little sheep, on the other hand." "Hey, where's that thing?" "What thing?" one of the Con with him replied. "That yellow band that Clan Toricus said we needed for potential visitors." "Ah, that thing, 1 minute." The Con returned with a rawhide strip that Elishnish would be hard-pressed to describe as yellow. He approached Vildava, gingerly holding the tiny strip in his claws. "What's that for?" Elishnish asked. "It's something to identify things as not for eating, basically." "Ow?" They looked over at Vildava. The bewildered Con in front of him picked the rawhide strip up off of the ground and leaned forward with it. Vildava's split-hoofed hand smacked it away again. "Arg." The Con dropped the strip and shook his paw. "What the? Not for eating?" Vildava bleated. "Never have I been so insulted in my life." It talks?" The patrol leader blinked. "Of course he talks," Elishnish said. "Vildava is one of our traveling companions." "But you said he was food." "Eventually," Pebble told him. Elishnish went over and picked up the rawhide strip and stuffed it into a pouch. "I'll do something about this later," she said. If Vildava didn't want it, then she would keep the thing. The item didn't seem to be magical, but it was undoubtedly useful. "Is there anything else we need to know?" Elishnish asked. "Dangerous fellows that we should be wary of or important people that we shouldn't cross?" "Dangerous fellows, I'm not sure if you'll end up there, but the tribes of the Waldspine raid our lands further to the east." "What's the Waldspine?" "It's the big mountain range north of Rolengork. There are a lot of nasty things up there. My advice would be not to get anywhere near. As for important people, every village has a chief. Every town has a clan lord. It might be hard for outsiders, but you should memorize what members of the big clans look like. Everyone listens to them." "That sounds straightforward enough," Elishnish said. "Anything more?" The patrol leader crossed his arms and looked up at the night sky. Nothing really comes to mind. Just being decent should keep you out of trouble. Hey, what about you guys? What's it like where you come from?" "Our homes are in the mountains, too," Elishnish replied. "But at a higher elevation. I suppose you could already tell by our thick coats." "Do you get raided often? Or do any raiding?" "Not recently. Our territories are plentiful enough." "Sounds nice," the patrol leader sighed. "It's starting to get crowded here and the only way we got to go is north. Damn trolls aren't even edible." "Trolls? Was that what was at that lake?" It made sense to her. Trolls would be useful and easy to control minions for a black dragon. They shared the same, swampy environment and black dragons breathed acid, which was fatal to trolls. "Expanding north probably isn't a good idea," Elishnish said. "Why's that?" "I meandered around a bit before arriving here. The area isn't only home to trolls, but also to at least one black dragon. Low murmurs rose from around the crowd. A dragon, you say? The patrol leader said, I should let the chief know about that. If it's there, we have to get rid of it right away. Are you sure about that? Of course. You have to get rid of dragons before they're too big to get rid of. Ilishnish suppressed a shudder. Other races had such a vicious outlook when it came to dragons. One could just quietly be minding their own business when a mob of goons randomly came by to turn them into a purse. After answering a few more questions, she thanked the Khan for their help and they continued on their way. The environment wasn't too different from that of the upper reaches of the Katza River. Conifer forests filled the highland valleys and rugged, rocky ranges dominated the skyline. The ground was moist from rains and the river they followed had swelled to overflow its banks in a few places, creating intermittent patches of flooded brush. This is a good place, Vltava said. The balance is strong and not easily disturbed. The Kronos druid nipped a patch of moss as they strolled by a fallen log. Did that count as poaching? If that's the case, Ilishnish asked, how do you feel about Lady Zaradnik's territory? The balance has gone all wonky there. She gave birth to a dryad within a year. The warden is a servant of the balance. There will always be some important reason why she does what she does. I don't think she's as unerring as you believe her to be. What is. And, so, their conversation ended. The peaks lining their passage grew further apart until they could no longer be seen from the valley floor. Their rugged trail grew wider as well, turning into a muddy yellow road pockmarked with pools of rainwater. Traffic also grew, and the Khan that they passed threw them curious glances. Ilishnish did her best to ignore them and pretend that nothing at all was amiss. The river eventually joined another as the patrol leader had described. They stopped at its banks, gazing across the silty current. Cows should be around here somewhere, I think. Ilishnish looked around. How do they cross the river, anyway? It must be at least 200 meters wide. A barge occasionally went by, but none stopped to ferry them across. After a few more vessels passed, Vltava sighed. Massfly. They skimmed across the water to the opposite shore. A set of con-mending fishing nets froze and stared at them as they landed on the town's wharf. Vltava gave them a look. What? Ilishnish picked up the murder sheep and scurried off. Stop trying to confront everything, Ilishnish said. Order must be established. They must learn to respect May. Did you just insert a bleat into the end of that sentence? No. You literally did. Ilishnish let out an exasperated sigh, shaking her head. Despite their unassuming, isolated nature, the Kronos could casually toy with the way that the world translated language. A sudden downpour drove them under the boughs of an unknown species of tree. She set Vltava down upon a protruding root and shook the water out of her coat. Look, Ilishnish said. We can't go around picking fights everywhere we go. By firmly establishing a hierarchy, Vltava replied, future challenges will be avoided. Where in the world is food on top of the hierarchy? No, don't answer that. You heard that patrol leader, decent behavior will get us by just fine. They're just curious, they're not challenging you. And if they do? In that case, they're the ones who started it. It's fine to defend oneself. Vltava flicked his ear and looked away. Ilishnish sighed in relief and settled onto her haunches, watching the locals make their way through the rain. Where should we go first? Ilishnish asked. Did you not scout the area a few days ago with the warden? Pebble asked back. I did, but we didn't go over every little bit of it. All of the interesting things that I noticed were further in. She eyed Pebble and Pinecone. Her strategy was to use them as a front and learn how things worked in Rolengork through their interactions. Instead, Vltava seemed to always take the initiative. Letting him do all of the talking was bound to start some sort of war, one that Vltava would probably win. How do I set this up? A dull rumble of thunder filled the air as the rain intensified. Some of the beastmen passing by ran over to join them under their tree. Guess the rains have come a bit early this year, a Con with a large pack sighed as he dragged himself in. Oh, you're not a Salo. I haven't seen your kind around here. We're from a people called the Kronos. Ilishnish shifted over on her route. Please, have a seat. You look like you've traveled far. Much obliged, the Con said. Name's Kiro, a humble peddler on the Kora run. Winter Moon, Ilishnish introduced herself. That's Pebble, and that's Pinecone. This is Voltava, who will become food eventually. Kira looked across Elishnish at Voltava, stroking his jaw with a paw. Food eventually, eh? How big will he get? He's already an adult, but his antlers make him look half again as large when they're fully grown. Interesting. And you're not eating him yet? Is he a stud for your herd? Voltava has 4 mates, Voltava said. I see, Kira nodded sagely. Forgive an old merchant for his habits, but do you offer any other products? The Chronos druid directed his gaze at Pebble and Pinecone. Pinecone gestured to his belt. We have many items fashioned out of his wool, he said. These pouches, for instance. Or this sling. His antlers are used for medicine and accessories. A sling? You're warriors, then? Hunters. Hunters? Using ranged weaponry? You must have some pretty nasty beasties where you live. Or are they flying ones? Once, there were dragons, Pebble said. More recently, it has only been magical beasts. Manticores, wyverns, griffins, giant eagles and the like. Elishnish eyed the sling in Pebble's claws. It looked highly valuable, and, as a weapon, that meant it was also probably very powerful. Had she inadvertently become traveling companions with a group of dangerous predators? They mentioned dragons, yet they had survived and the dragons had not. Very nice, Kira gave the items an appraising look. We mostly deal in nug wool and leather, ourselves. How far are your territories? Clan Toricus said that the expansion in the west might create opportunities for trade, but I didn't expect those opportunities to come to us. It's not very far, Elishnish said, but there are certain obstacles in the way. We live on the other side of a large negative energy zone called the Katsa Plains. There are a number of human-inhabited lands around it. Then I suppose old Kira will be long gone before we see much from there. A pity, I always wanted to see a bit more of the world. You have other borders, do you not? Well, Kiro said, there's the loot but I'm no salt runner. The clans down south control that trade anyway. Everywhere else, the neighbors are more likely to attack you than talk. So you settle on peddling your wares on this Kora run. It's not so bad, Kiro leaned back and stretched his legs. The people are good and friendly and they're always happy to see old Kiro. What sort of wares are you carrying right now? Elishnish asked. Would you like to take a look? Just a moment here. The old con pushed himself to his feet, going over to unpack his things. He laid out several large rolls of leather, bundles of wool, herbs, and strips of preserved meat. A few people came over to examine his goods. Since you're heading to Cow, Elishnish said, does this mean that these products are from a village somewhere? The village is up in the mountains nearby, Kiro said. They're simple, honest folk, herding nug and living off of the land. Though they were called something different, nug seemed mostly identical to nook. She raised a strip of preserved meat to her face and sniffed it experimentally. They smelled the same, too. This appears to be edible. How far is it to the nearest city? Ora's about 100 kilometers downriver. How much meat are you carrying? Going by Zushiri's journey through the empire, prices for things were higher in cities than in the countryside. If she needed to pay for anything, she would rather pay less. I can part with 60 kilograms. Do you accept trade coins? Trade coins? That might be a bit much. In the end, she bought the meat, 4 rolls of leather, a bale of nug wool and a bundle of each of the herbs that Kira was carrying. The old con merchant looked down at the gold trade coin in his paw. Well, that sure is a weight off of my shoulders, he said. You folks plan on visiting for long? We're not even sure how large this place is, Elishnish replied. Do you have any recommendations as to where we should go? They say Khostorfi Keral's the center of everything, Kira replied. It's halfway across Rolengork, though. Guess it's not too long of a trip if you can afford a spot on a ship. What about work? Is there something like an adventurer guild? The con merchant furrowed his brow. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with what you just mentioned. It's something like a place where hunters can find work. Dealing with magical beasts, monsters and the like. We don't have anything like that. The warrior clans take care of those problems. Arg, am I going to be losing coins all trip? The trip to the Empire was highly lucrative, so she had hoped for the same in Rolengork. You can probably find work in the cities as menial labor, Kiro offered. The foremen always pick out the biggest and strongest. Aside from that, do you have any special skills? I'm a bard. A bard? That's classy stuff. In that case, you might be able to find work in the high-class districts in the cities. Any clan with the means will take in a good bard. That sounded far more promising than menial labor. Eventually, the reins gave out and they parted ways with Kiro. They followed the Kora River on its southward course, passing through one town before reaching a beastman city at the end of a modest lake. It, too, was populated by Kon, but the architecture, if one could call it that, of the city was different from the settlements from before that took advantage of natural terrain for dens and other structures. Then joined a short line at the city entrance, which was marked by an opening in its overgrown earthen wall. Elishnish had a sense that it was there more to keep the jungle and elements at bay rather than serve any defensive function. When it came their turn, one of the sentries shouted up at her. "Declare yourselves." Elishnish started at the sudden noise and looked down at the sentry. "Just because I'm taller than you doesn't mean that you need to shout up at me." "Sorry. State your name and your business in Oro." "My name is Winter Moon. My companions here are Pebble and Pinecone." What are you doing?" "I'm not doing anything," Viltava replied. The Kronos druid was standing between Pebble and Pinecone with a con cub dangling off of him. The young Felid beastman wasn't able to damage Viltava, but it appeared to be having the time of its life with his woolen coat. "Whose child is this?" Elishnish called out. "I'm so sorry." One of the con behind them gasped. "Kaya, you can't do that. Let go, Kaya. Please forgive us, she's still too young, she's been pouncing on everything recently." "It's not a problem," Elishnish said, then turned back to the sentry. "This is Viltava." Viltava stared up at the sentries with his middle eye. The sentries eyed him warily. "What is he?" one of them asked. "Food," Elishnish replied. "Eventually. If he's not to be eaten immediately," the sentry said, "we have something you can use to." "Ah, if you're talking about those bands, we have one. He doesn't like them, though. Being marked as a non-consumable is an insult to one whose ultimate purpose is to be consumed." The sentries didn't seem to have any answer to that. She took advantage of their confused silence to ask another question. "By the way, I am a bard by trade. Might you know of some place where I might find suitable employ for the duration of my stay?" "A bard? Head to the clan hold." "Thank you," Elishnish said. "By the way, what is the name of the clan that presides here?" "Komnoro." "Oro, as in the same name used for the city?" "Yeah. The name of the place is the name of the clan in charge. That's how it works around here." She thanked the sentry again before walking into the city. The morning's rain had turned its streets into running streams that emptied into the river that cut through its center. Thousands of con made their way through the trees, those coming close to Elishnish's group casting curious glances at them. Elishnish looked around for something that might be considered a clan hold, but eventually gave up and approached a set of beastmen loitering under a set of huge roots stretching out across the forest floor. "Excuse me," she asked. "Could you direct us to the clan hold?" One of the con pointed past her shoulder, towards the top of a hill overlooking the lake. She thanked them before going on her way, looking back and forth at the wealth of new things as they made their way up. "Is any of this at all familiar to you?" "No," Pebble said. "It's strange, the appearance and behavior of these cons suggest they're more suited for the highlands we first encountered them in. There's a sense of awkwardness in their presence here." "You're probably right about that," Elishnish said, "but it's a city. Instead of hunting, they work. Hunting ranges become meaningless, but one's nature is not so easy to change. If I were to describe it, they haven't made sense of urban realities yet." Upon closer inspection, it was simply a place where many gathered because work, and thus food, was available. There were laborers and a few merchants scattered about. People exchanged labor or goods for what they needed. Nothing resembled a workshop, and industries appeared to revolve around fishing, ranching, leather, hand-woven textiles and timber. Kiro's simple and honest folk could also be interpreted as primitive. At least if one judged things the way that humans did. Since she was posing as one of the Kronos, however, she couldn't express herself in that manner. Strangely enough, thinking like a dragon was more in line with the Kronos. Like dragons, they had existed as an established culture for a very long time, and were far more advanced than most realized. It was to the degree that one couldn't consider it in terms of ahead or behind. They were ancient, while most societies in the region were laughably young. The world will reject them, soon enough, Vltava said as they strolled along a street stream. This recklessness can only end in a violent response. Their course may still change, Pinecone said. Too optimistic, Vltava replied. Could you stop dooming them in the middle of the street? Ilishnish said, what will happen to them will happen, but I'd rather not anything happen to us along the way. Dozens of sentries were already carefully monitoring their approach by the time they reached the rocky crest of the hill. The beastmen present were all significantly stronger than those who dwelled below, though they still couldn't match Pebble and Pinecone, never mind Vltava and herself. My name is Wintermoon, Ilishnish greeted the stern-faced guards with an elegant gesture. I am a traveling bard from the distant northwest, come to learn of Rolengork and its people. The sentries in the front looked over their shoulders, to a slightly larger beastman standing higher up the land. He made his way down with a measured gait, coming to stand before her while making a gesture of his own. I am Elinor Conoro, he said. It would be our honor to receive you and your companions in our hold, Wintermoon. Is this the noble hospitality that Lady Wagner spoke of? The hold of Clan Oro bore little resemblance to the holds of human lords. There was no manor or keep, only a spacious expanse under the boughs of a great tree. The tree itself grew near the top of the city's highest hill, and many dens were fashioned in its shadow. Elinor Conoro entertained them beside a clear pool fed by channels of rainwater that flowed down between the tree's labyrinthine roots. Hundreds of his warriors feasted around them, and the occasion filled the surroundings with good cheer. According to Lady Wagner, who had briefed her on the Empire's aristocracy before she was sent on her winter assignment, human nobles did something similar. Be they from Baharuth, Riastais or Roble, those who paid a visit to a noble manor were afforded hospitality in accordance with their station. No one was turned away, even common travelers were at least given a safe place to rest and some food, though commoners were usually more comfortable finding lodgings with other commoners. Knights dined with lords in their halls and fellow lords were treated to feasts. Kings and emperors were, of course, spared no expense. Countess Calling mentioned that monasteries and hospitals filled that role in the theocracy for pilgrims, clergymen and other travelers, though Ilishnish wasn't sure what a monastery was. This custom was, of course, not some one-sided show of hospitality. Several expectations were placed upon the guests. First was that travelers were usually the only source of news in provincial regions, so they were expected to share what they had heard during their journeys. Much of the host population's repository of lore and recent events was woven in this manner. Additionally, word of the host's hospitality and the various things that they displayed were to be spread. In other words, it was a way of building prestige, advertising goods, and adding various other tidbits to the slow flow of information that circulated a realm. Bards were universally recognized, and their role as bearers of culture, lore and information usually earned them a special place at a lord's table. Conversely, a poorly treated bard could ruin a lord's reputation through skillful slander and manipulation of information. The question now was how much of that applied to beastman lords and what other things they might expect of her. Can I figure out what he wants in a roundabout way? Maybe I could just get him to talk about himself. Your city appears prosperous and lively, Elinor, Ilishnish said. It does not fall short of the major cities that I've seen in my travels. Elinor's tail came up, his posture shifting in a clear display of pride. Is that so? He said, of the outside world, we only have knowledge of the Draconic Kingdom's cities to compare to. Where have your wanderings taken you? I have just started my travels recently, but I've already been to many places. I have seen the cavernous underground strongholds of the mountain dwarves and the citadels of frost giants in the frozen peaks. My journeys have taken me over the cold waters of the northern ocean where mountains of ice ride the waves and leviathans rule the deep. Most recently, I skirted a vast plain ruled by the undead and through the lands of a human empire, witnessing their war of ruthless expansion against a quiet woodland realm. All around them, members of Clan Oro quieted and shifted closer to hear her words. As expected, the leader of the warrior clan picked out the last bit of her spiel. Where did this war you speak of happen, and when? Not 3 months ago, Ilishnish replied. Roughly 1,500 kilometers north by northwest of your fair city. The woodland realm is known as the Blister, a beautiful jungle sanctuary nestled in a volcanic caldera over 100 kilometers wide. It is a place of bubbling hot springs that feed warm rivers and steaming lakes. Its dense canopy traps the heat rising from the ground, turning it into a place that feels like summer the year round. And the inhabitants? Eleanor asked. Who was it that called the blister home? Magical beasts, heteromorphs, and demi-humans of many types. Goblins, ogres, trolls, and troglodytes. Mightiest amongst the tribes of the blister were those of the noble hyena beastfolk that you may know as gnolls. Over them all, however, was an ancient green dragon, the Viridian Dragonlord, who scattered her progeny across the jungle to play their insidious games of intrigue. Eleanor and his warriors gaped at her claim. An ancient green? Indeed, Elishnish inclined her head slightly. A mighty worm who stood unchallenged for centuries, whose domain encompassed not only the blister, but also the lands of the human empire around it. The Viridian Dragonlord exacted tribute from them all, and it was for that reason that the humans took out their weapons to overthrow her. I find it difficult to believe that humans, of all people, could stand up to an ancient dragon. Eleanor leaned forward. Did they have some secret weapon that gave them the means to challenge the Viridian Dragonlord? Many powerful champions came together to slay the foul green and her brood. Do you know of the nature of green dragons? We sure do. There are dozens of those nasty reptiles lording over the Yorgulan Commonwealth to the east. We've been fighting them for generations. Ah, that explains your keen interest in the tale, but, no, the humans had only their champions, their armies and their magic to contest the Dragon Lord's reign. The Con Lord's demeanor imperceptibly shifted, as if something disappointed him. It only lasted for a moment, however, and Elishnish continued the tale. The Empire was shrewd in its preparations, laying traps before executing their plans. Their first move coincided with the presentation of their tribute, for the Viridian Dragon Lord was proud and vain and loved to display her superiority over all. To do this, she had her brood gather the mightiest of their servants to form a parade that conveyed the tribute to her lair. In one fell swoop, the Empire's champions fell upon the champions of the jungle, wholly slaughtering them while they were burdened with their task. And, in doing so, Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, they knocked out the Green Dragon's strongest supporters. Just so. Their victory over the jungle champions also marked the beginning of the Empire's greater assault. With a Viridian Dragon Lord waiting in her lair for her treasure, they only had a few days to defeat the remainder of the jungle tribes. Flights of hippogriffs and griffins mounted by dragoons and war wizards fell upon the disparate tribes, while the Empire's army marched into the jungle, trampling its denizens who were unaware that a grand offensive had commenced. Warrior, civilian and child alike felt a cold steel and fiery spell. Partway through their advance, however, the Viridian Dragon Lord roused and became aware of the humans' advance into her domain. I don't see how the humans could survive the wrath of an ancient dragon, Eleanor said. She was tempted to include her part in the fight, but decided it would lead to awkward questions. The Viridian Dragon Lord thought the very same thing. Elishnish nodded. Her minions and her brood were depleted, but she was still mighty in her own right. Confident that the humans could do nothing to her, she departed the jungle to show the humans the folly of their actions by choking their cities to death with her noxious breath. How many of the humans died? None, Elishnish said. None? Indeed, none. For the Viridian Dragon Lord committed an error. Distracted by the brave flying forces sent against her, she didn't realize that she was now the target of a trap. The aerial battle strayed over the foothills of the Azalizia Mountains, which was the territory of their powerful neighbor. Within minutes, a terrible dark elf appeared to slay the Viridian Dragon Lord with a single arrow from her bow. Deathly silence followed the fall of the Viridian Dragon Lord. Elishnish could sympathize. She would be terrified upon hearing that for the first time as well. A dark elf, you say? Eleanor swallowed. I've never heard of such a terrifying being. Terrifying doesn't even begin to describe her. Elishnish's voice was grave. Before anyone realized, she dressed the Viridian Dragon Lord as if she were a hunter dressing another day's quarry felled in the field. An ancient dragon turned into a pile of crafting materials in seconds. How far is the Draconic Kingdom from the territory of this dark elf? The Con Lord asked. We should warn Clan Toriko about such a powerful being if her territory is nearby. Or maybe. Eleanor crossed his arms and looked down at the stone table between them, brows furrowed in thought. Elishnish took the opportunity to pop a chunk of nug meat into her mouth. It really did taste like nook. Could it be that you wish to meet her? Elishnish asked after going through an entire plate of meat. Before he embarked on his great venture in the west, Elinor said, Kalilindratha said that new opportunities for our people must surely come with the conquest of the Draconic Kingdom. Not just opportunities for land and trade, but also chances to build beneficial relationships with the nations that lie beyond. Rolengork has always been surrounded by enemies, he said, and we must learn how to make friends. Are your neighbors truly so bad? They are, in different ways. The Yorgulans and their green dragon masters are a slowly growing threat that becomes more aggressive over time. The tribes of the Walled Spine may as well be from a different world. Profit is the only motive of the Great Loot, and they as a great leech that cannot be removed. What about the Draconic Kingdom? The humans? Elinor snorted, the humans are the worst. We are naturally predator and prey, but it is on the largest raids that you see their true nature shine through. I have witnessed it personally on several occasions, when fiery angels fill the skies and I stared into the eyes of their elite warbands. They do not see us as beings who also struggle for our place in the world, but as things to be destroyed. It is no simple war that they wage, they take great glee in going out of their way to torture and slay our braves. Everyone in the West knows that there can be no peace with the Draconic Kingdom, for they would destroy us all if given the chance. Lady Zaradnik seemed to have a glowing opinion of the Draconic Kingdom's people, so Elishnish wondered how the Beastmen had arrived at such a different conclusion. It was as if they were talking about two entirely different countries. Then again, they did light people on fire. Maybe they were mad about being eaten, Elishnish offered. That's unreasonable, Elinor waved a paw dismissively. Besides, it's not as if we've been eating them into extinction. We have always followed the ways of predator and prey. Without us, their lands would be overpopulated and overgrazed. Besides, you don't see us complaining about being eaten by others. You may have a point there. It was perfectly natural to fear for one's life and fight for survival, but, as far as she knew, humans were the only race that complained about being eaten. Other races treated predation as an unfortunate fact of life at most. If you seek friends that may see things more as you do, Elishnish said, I would say that the City-State Alliance is your best bet. What's that? They are the remnants of a nation called Carnassus, which was shattered by the advent of the demon gods. Humans live there as well, but they are only one of many species that call themselves citizens. By virtue of that alone, one may assume that they hold a broader worldview. That sounds promising, Elinor said. Whereabouts are they? North of the Walled Spine, Elishnish said. They occupy the plateau region between the Baharuth Empire in the west and the Great Steppe in the east. If crossing directly over the Walled Spine proves too difficult, you can always try going around. Another rainstorm swept over the city, accompanied by peals of thunder that reverberated across the valley. Elishnish turned her attention upwards, watching water trickle from the branches above. These patterns of weather don't match what I'm familiar with, she said. What are the seasons like in Rolengork? We have a dry season in the winter, Elinor said, and a wet season for half the year following it. Is it safe to travel in the coming months? The initial deluge makes travel over land treacherous. Flooding and mudslides are common. If you plan on traveling during those weeks, I would suggest going by way of the river. The deluge is a quiet period when most of us spend time with our families, but the cities will be lively enough. Since it's like that, Elishnish said, I've heard of a great city in the east. I'd like to get there as quickly as possible. I believe you will find much of interest there. As for the fastest route, you can cut through the jungle east of here. After 100 kilometers, you'll find yourself in the Tsultul River Valley. If you follow that river downstream, you'll reach the city of Achi, where the Tsultul joins the Orakalon. Ilinkotl Osealo Achi is a good friend of mine and he would be ecstatic to host you in his hold. They remained in Oro until the morning, and Elishnish entertained her hosts with a selection of tales and news from the world abroad. She purposely avoided mentioning the Sorceress Kingdom and any connections that she had with the undead, as it seemed like a bad idea to be associated with what most considered the enemies of all life. Elinor was already more than satisfied with her offerings, so there was no need to go out of her way to invite trouble. The following morning, Elinor saw Elishnish and her companions to Oro's eastern gate, describing the way to the pass leading to the next valley. They made their way through the pouring rain, following a well-traveled road up the mountain. Once the city disappeared behind a bend in the jungle trail, Elishnish addressed the Kronos. So, Elishnish asked, what did you think of Elinor and his people? A variation of a path well worn, Vltava said. We have seen it countless times before, and shall see it many times more. You don't have to make it sound so bland, Elishnish said. Theirs is one song amongst many, but that song is still uniquely theirs. It has a value intrinsic to itself. May. What a rude fellow. Maybe it was a side effect of being a member of such an ancient society. Anything new was just as likely something old, and thus they were unimpressed by nearly everything. Elishnish hoped that she wouldn't be like that when she was an ancient. It was such a cold and distant way to look at the world, suited to those who isolated themselves from it. What about you two? She asked the two rangers. Their culture is a collection of long-forgotten scars, Pinecone said. It is tragic to look upon. Would you relieve them of that tragedy? Elishnish asked. No, Pinecone answered. That tragedy is as much a part of the world as anything else. It is their song to sing, as you might say, Seeker. In many ways, the Chronos were relaxing to be around. They generally understood what was necessary and unnecessary, and they had a fair idea of how things fit together. It was unlike traveling with the many mortals that constantly tried to impose their worldview on everything and became offended whenever something had the gall to oppose it. In that case, did you notice anything troublesome for us? No, Vltava said. The effect of their actions is limited. A ripple in the corner of an ocean. I have seen neither power nor will enough to be of any note. This is an assessment for the present, Pebble said. Though they may ultimately not get very far on their own, they may contribute to something greater than themselves. This is not always desirable. It is not our concern. At what point does it become your concern? Elishnish eyed the Chronos druid worriedly. I hope we won't end up flattening half of the country. Vltava trotted ahead to investigate a clump of ferns. Then he took them all in one vicious chomp. Elishnish's worries grew. Did he just make a statement? She wasn't sure if she could stop him if he decided to act on something. Destroying cities left and right would make reporting the information that Lady Shiltia wanted difficult, and if the evil little vampire didn't hear what she wanted to hear, things would go poorly for Elishnish. They arrived in the Tsultul River Valley late that afternoon, stopping at a rocky outcropping several hundred meters off of the trail. There, she had the Chronos stop for a meal while she scouted the surroundings from the air. It didn't take long for her to discover that they had entered a valley she had crossed over with Lady Zaradnik on their brief flyover of the Beastman country. Relief fell over her and she returned to her companions. I know where we are now, Elishnish told them. We can be in the city I wanted to see in 2 or 3 days. Vltava rose from where he was resting and floated back down to the trail. Elishnish assumed her Felid Chronos appearance and rushed off after him. Why did you want to come here, anyway? She asked. Curiosity, Vltava answered. Over what? Before encountering the warden, we were migrating eastward. We scried the way ahead, past the place of unlife to the lands beyond. We found a place ideal for habitation, which the locals call the Walled Spine, but since we settled under the warden's protection, many questions remain unanswered about what we saw. They crossed paths with a set of different Felid beastmen from before. These ones were larger than the con and had dark, spotted rosettes over coats of yellow shades. About 1 in 10 had black coats, though there were no other differences between those and the rest. Elishnish bobbed her head in silent greeting as they passed one another, ready to snatch Vltava and run away if he tried to bite them. After going by without incident, she released a quiet sigh of relief. Those are the Osalo that Lady Zaradnik described to me, she said. They're physically more powerful than the Con, but the Con have better endurance. Are the tribes here all divided by species? Pebble asked. That seems to be the case, both here and in the Draconic Kingdom. The rural territories are occupied by tribes composed of a single species, which answer to clans of that same species. That big city I mentioned has a good mix of them. Now that she thought about it, the Chronos didn't have the telltale tribal foundation of many races in the region. The core of their society was a mutualistic relationship between the Felid Chronos and their druidic counterparts. Unlike tribal societies, it was practically impossible to drive a wedge between the two. Attempting to do so was akin to trying to convince a squirrel that trees were bad. How come I don't see other species with the same sort of relationship that the Chronos have? Because the races here are young, Vltava said, in a manner of speaking. They are not the same as their predecessors of eons past. It is corruption that has manifested in recent times. The beings of the present are born captive to that corruption, and the degree to which the corruption affects them depends on the degree that they have been usurped. Biology, identity, ideology, thought and circumstance, that which was built on those things crumbles away as new realities establish themselves. But that's chaos. Indeed, Vltava said. Chaos reigns, and it is a chaos that most do not recognize. Sanctuaries of true natural order are precious and rare, and fragile. She already had a sense of that. Many things were broken, and none of those things could be repaired. All one could do was make do with the remains. I have to wonder how the Kronos survived unscathed. Not unscathed, Vltava told her. All have been touched. But the Kronos do not exist. Those who do not exist cannot be usurped. Thus, we retain much of what we were. At the same time, our mortal lifespans spare us from the fate of others who existed before the corruption. Such as? The keepers of old. Once, they were part of the same world as us. But they are eternal, and their legacy has been usurped. Now, they are the champions of a world that no longer exists, eternally lost as they are driven to maintain what no longer is. Well, that's not horrifying at all. Vltava's words reached deep into her soul, striking a chord of terror unachievable by any mortal peril. What would it be like to understand one's purpose in life, yet be eternally denied that purpose as it no longer existed? I suppose the products of this corruption are in the most favorable position, in that case, Ilishnish muttered. To an extent, Vltava said. The primal energies of the world, in particular, have been provided with ways to manifest themselves. This was not possible before. It comes with a sort of confusion on its own, however. As it is with our dear warden. As it is with the warden, yes. They arrived at the city of Achi after nightfall, lining up outside the gate as they had at Oro. The fact that the city's inhabitants were not bound by diurnal habits meant that it was just as busy as, if not more than, any human city during the day. Ilishnish idly tapped the pink pads of her paws together as the line slowly shuffled forward, watching those ahead of her interact with the city's security. Recalling what had happened at the previous city, she tucked Vltava under an arm before their turn came around. The sentries at the entry gaped up at her. Ilishnish cleared her throat. My name is Winter Moon. These are my traveling companions, Pebble and Pinecone. And Vltava. A long silence ensued as the Osalo warriors looked back and forth between them. Someone in the back shouted for them to hurry up. What's your business here? The larger of the two sentries asked. I am a bard traveling through the region, Ilishnish replied. Eleanor Konoro mentioned that I would receive a warm welcome from Osalo Achi. Was he mistaken? Of course not. The clan hold is across the river on the mountain. You'll have to take a ferry at the docks to get there. Ilishnish thanked the sentry and entered the city. Achi had an entirely different design from Oro, splitting into two levels not far past its entrance. The ramp to the upper level led to a network of arboreal walkways, while the lower level consisted of boardwalks winding their way over the jungle floor. The upper level seemed to be occupied solely by Osalo, so she opted to take the ground route. A short journey through the undergrowth led them to a riverfront teeming with activity. Most of it was centered around the barges moored along the long wharf. Ilishnish tried to make sense of the cargo being loaded and unloaded. Timber, leather, wool, ivory, meat, fish. In short, it was more of the same she had already seen along the trade routes of Rolengork. Disappointingly, there was still no sign of the jewels mentioned by the Kon villagers near the border. There were several covered barges that gave off the scent of humans, but she wasn't in the Beastman country for those. We should secure some accommodations, Ilishnish said. Did Eleanor not recommend that you visit with the presiding clan here? Pinecone asked. He did, Ilishnish answered, but I'd like to see how the common people get by. Let's see. Ilishnish tried making sense of the establishments along the waterfront. They were nothing like the warehouses, shops and inns of human settlements, so she could only make guesses based on what the people in and around them were doing. She stopped in front of one of the larger trees, which had a ramp leading up to a platform halfway to the lower branches. Dozens of beastmen lounged high above. This seems promising. Wait here, Ilishnish said. I'll see if I can't find the proprietor of this inn, if it's even an inn at all. She made her way up the ramp, which wound around the tree trunk before reaching a landing 10 meters over the river. Curious glances turned in her direction as she looked around for something resembling a reception counter. An Osalo female tentatively approached, her tail tucked between her legs. Is there something we can help you with? She asked. Yes, Elishnish replied. I seek lodgings for myself and my companions. Is this the appropriate establishment? If so, are you the proprietor? I'm the innkeeper. It's 1 copper per person per night? Why is she framing her rates as a question? Elishnish stuck her paw into an infinite haversack. The Osalo backed away cautiously, then visibly relaxed when Elishnish produced a silver trade coin. 1 night, please, Elishnish said. Do you have change for this? Or some supplies that we can purchase? Of course. Thank you for your patronage. Which one was it? Elishnish furrowed her brow at the retreating figure of the Osalo innkeeper. Was it something she was doing that kept eliciting their timid behavior? After failing to think of anything, she shrugged internally, heading back down to retrieve her companions. The furrow returned to her brow when she found Pebble and Pinecone at the bottom of the ramp. Where's Voltava? She asked. Pebble gestured south along the wharf, to where 3 Irma surrounded the diminutive Kronos druid. Look, one of the lion beast folk said with a flick of his ear. What exactly is your problem? There is no problem, Voltava flicked his ear back. There obviously is. Uh-oh. What happened? Elishnish asked in a low voice. Nothing, Pebble replied. There is no problem, Pinecone added. No, there obviously is. A furious roar carried through the air. That's it. I've had enough of you. Bring it on, pussy. Elishnish dashed for cover,